it was not against my neighbour or your worship's authority, and so far, it seems to me, I have not broken the said article." "I remember no such article, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "and even if it were so, I desire you to hold your tongue and come along, for the instruments we heard last night are already beginning to enliven the valleys again, and no doubt the marriage will take place in the cool of the morning, and not in the heat of the afternoon." Sancho did as his master bade him, and putting the saddle on Rocinante and the pack saddle on Dapple, they both mounted, and at a leisurely pace entered the arcade. The first thing that presented itself to Sancho's eyes was a whole ox spitted on a whole elm tree, and in the fire at which it was to be roasted there was burning a middle-sized mountain of faggots, and 6 stew-pots that stood round the blaze had not been made in the ordinary mould of common pots, for they were 6 half wine jars, each fit to hold the contents of a slaughter-house. They swallowed up whole sheep and hid them away in their insides without showing any more sign of them than if they were pigeons. Countless were the hares ready-skinned and plucked fowls that hung on trees for burial in the pots, numberless the wild fowl and game of various sorts suspended from the branches that the air might keep them cool. Sancho counted more than 60 wineskins of over 6 gallons each, and all filled, as it proved afterwards, with generous wines. There were, besides, piles of the whitest bread, like the heaps of corn one sees on the threshing floors. There was a wall made of cheeses arranged like an open brickwork, and 2 cauldrons full of oil, bigger than those of a dyer's sheep, served for cooking fritters, which when fried were taken out with 2 mighty shovels, and plunged into another cauldron of prepared honey that stood close by. Of cooks and cook-maids there were over 50, all clean, brisk, and blithe. In the capacious belly of the ox were a dozen soft little suckling pigs, which, sewn up there, served to give it the tenderness and flavour. The spices of different kinds did not seem to have been bought by the pound but by the quarter, and all lay open to view in a great chest. In short, all the preparations made for the wedding were in rustic cycle, but abundant enough to feed an army. Sancho observed all, contemplated all, and everything won his heart. The first to captivate and take his fancy were the pots, out of which he would very gladly help himself to make a moderate pipkinful. Then the wineskins secured his affections, and lastly the produce of the frying pans, if, indeed, such imposing cauldrons may be called frying pans. And unable to control himself or bear it any longer, he approached one of the busy cooks and civilly but hungrily begged permission to soak a scrap of bread in one of the pots, to which the cook made answer, "Brother, this is not a day on which hunger is to have any sway, thanks to the rich Camacho. Get down and look about for a ladle, and skim off a hen or 2, and much good may they do you." "I don't see one," said Sancho. "Wait a bit," said the cook, "sinner that I am. How particular and bashful you are." And so saying, he seized a bucket, and plunging it into one of the half jars, took up 3 hens and a couple of geese, and said to Sancho, "Fall to, friend, and take the edge off your appetite with these skimmings until dinner time comes." "I have nothing to put them in," said Sancho. "Well then," said the cook, "take spoon and all, for Camacho's wealth and happiness furnish everything." While Sancho fared thus, Don Quixote was watching the entrance, at one end of the arcade, of some 12 peasants, all in holiday and gala dress, mounted on 12 beautiful mares, with rich handsome field trappings and a number of little bells attached to their petrals, who, marshalled in their regular order, ran not one but several courses over the meadow, with jubilant shouts and cries of "Long live Camacho and Quiteria! He is as rich as she is fair, and she the fairest on earth." Hearing this, Don Quixote said to himself, "It is easy to see these folk have never seen my Dulcinea del Toboso, for if they had, they would be more moderate in their praises of this Quiteria of theirs." Shortly after this, several bands of dancers of various sorts began to enter the arcade at different points, and among them one of the sword dancers composed of some 24 lads of gallant and high-spirited mien, clad in the finest and whitest of linen, and with handkerchiefs embroidered in various colours with fine silk, and one of those on the mares asked an active youth who led them if any of the dancers had been wounded. "As yet, thank God, no one has been wounded," said he; "we are all safe and sound." And he at once began to execute complicated figures with the rest of his comrades, with so many turns and so great dexterity, that although Don Quixote was well used to see dances of the same kind, he thought he had never seen any so good as this. He admired another that came in composed of fair young maidens, none of whom seemed to be under 14 or over 18 years of age, all clad in green stuff, with their locks partly braided, partly flowing loose, but all of such bright gold as to vie with the sunbeams, and over them they wore garlands of jessamine, roses, amaranth, and honeysuckle. At their head were a venerable old man and an ancient dame, more brisk and active, however, than might have been expected from their years. The notes of a Zamora bagpipe accompanied them, and with modesty in their countenances and their eyes, and lightness in their feet, they looked the best dancers in the world. Following these, there came an artistic dance of the sort they call speaking dances. It was composed of 8 nymphs in 2 files, with the god Cupid leading one and Interest the other, the former furnished with wings, bow, quiver, and arrows, the latter in a rich dress of gold and silk of divers colours. The nymphs that followed Love bore their names written on white parchment in large letters on their backs. Poetry was the name of the first, Wit of the second, Birth of the third, and Valour of the fourth. Those that followed Interest were distinguished in the same way. The badge of the first announced liberality, that of the second, largesse, the third, treasure, and the fourth, peaceful possession. In front of them all came a wooden castle drawn by 4 wild men, all clad in ivy and hemp and stained green, and looking so natural that they nearly terrified Sancho. On the front of the castle and on each of the 4 sides of its frame it bore the inscription, Castle of Caution. 4 skilful tabor and flute players accompanied them, and the dance having been opened, Cupid, after executing 2 figures, raised his eyes and bent his bow against a damsel who stood between the turrets of the castle, and thus addressed her. I am the mighty god whose sway is potent over land and sea. The heavens above us own me. Nay, the shades below acknowledge me. I know not fear, I have my will, whatever my whim or fancy may be. For me there's no impossible. I order, bind, forbid, and set free. Having concluded the stanza, he discharged an arrow at the top of the castle, and went back to his place. Interest then came forward, and went through 2 more figures, and as soon as the tabors ceased, he said, But mightier than love am I, though love it be that leads me on, then mine no lineage is more high, or older underneath the sun. To use me rightly few know how, to act without me fewer still, for I am Interest, and I vow for evermore to do thy will. Interest retired, and Poetry came forward, and when she had gone through her figures like the others, fixing her eyes on the damsel of the castle, she said, With many a fanciful conceit, fair lady, winsome poesy her soul, an offering at thy feet, presents in sonnets unto thee. If thou my homage wilt not scorn, thy fortune, watched by envious eyes, on wings of poesy upborne, shall be exalted into the skies. Poetry withdrew, and on the side of Interest liberality advanced, and after having gone through her figures, said, To give, while shunning each extreme, the sparing hand, the over-free, therein consists, so wise men deem, the virtue, liberality. But thee, fair lady, go enrich, myself a prodigal I'll prove, of vice not wholly shameful, which may find its fair excuse in love. In the same manner all the characters of the 2 bands advanced and retired, and each executed its figures, and delivered its verses, some of them graceful, some burlesque, but Don Quixote's memory, though he had an excellent one, only carried away those that have just been quoted. All then mingled together, forming chains and breaking off again with graceful, unconstrained gaiety, and whenever Love passed in front of the castle he shot his arrows up at it, while Interest spoke gilded pellets against it. At length, after they had danced a good while, Interest drew out a great purse, made of the skin of a large brindled cat, and to all appearance full of money, and flung it at the castle, and with the full force of the blow, the boards fell asunder and tumbled down, leaving the damsel exposed and unprotected. Interest and the characters of his band advanced, and throwing a great chain of gold over her neck pretended to take her and lead her away captive, on seeing which, Love and his supporters made as though they would release her, the whole action being to the accompaniment of the tabors and the form of regular dance. the wild man made peace between them.